The night sky erupted into fire. Sirens screamed, glass shattered, and the heart of the city convulsed in chaos. A towering plume of smoke clawed upward, painting the skyline in shades of ash and red. People ran through the streets, their faces streaked with fear and disbelief. What was supposed to be a quiet evening had just become a war zone. From the wreckage, investigators recovered something chilling: official documents, charred at the edges, bearing the seal of the Westbrook Homeowners Association. At first, it seemed impossible. An HOA, the kind of group that usually argued about lawn heights and mailbox colors, was linked to the deadliest bombing the city had ever seen. But as the inquiry deepened, the truth was worse than anyone imagined. The HOA wasn't just a group of nosy neighbors. It was a front, a mask, an organization quietly run by agents of an enemy country. And one FBI agent was about to uncover just how deep this betrayal went. If you want to see how an ordinary HOA turned into a weapon of war and how the FBI fought to stop their next strike, make sure to subscribe right now so you don't miss the full story. The evening was supposed to be quiet. Families in the suburb of Westbrook were preparing for dinner, the sun slipping behind the rooftops, sprinklers ticking across manicured lawns. Then, at precisely 7:14 p.m., the earth shook with a thunderous roar. A column of fire and smoke erupted from the community center, the very heart of the neighborhood. Windows shattered for blocks, alarms screamed, and panic swept the streets as people scrambled for cover. The explosion wasn't just destructive, it was surgical, as if designed to send a message. Emergency services swarmed the scene within minutes. Firefighters battled flames that clawed at the night sky. Police cordoned off the area, and ambulances rushed away with the injured. But what stood out, what everyone noticed, was the insignia plastered on the burning wreckage, the seal of the Westbrook Homeowners Association. The community center, the hub of all HOA meetings, had been ground zero for the blast. Within the hour, speculation ran wild. Was it a gas leak? Domestic terrorism? A political statement? Reporters crowded the perimeter, their cameras capturing sobbing families, flashing lights, and the haunting silhouette of the destroyed building. Local law enforcement quickly realized they were in over their heads. This wasn't a neighborhood dispute gone wrong. This was deliberate, calculated. Someone wanted blood. The following morning, the FBI officially took over the investigation. Special Agent Daniel Cross arrived on scene, his badge heavy on his belt, his jaw set like stone. Cross was known within the Bureau for his meticulous eye and unrelenting pursuit of the truth. Tall, broad-shouldered, with dark eyes that seemed to weigh every word before it was spoken, he had the presence of someone who didn't waste time. Cross stepped over debris as forensic teams collected samples and bomb techs mapped the blast pattern, and the air still carried the acrid stench of smoke and chemicals. "Homemade explosives, but not amateur," one tech muttered, kneeling near a scorched beam. "Whoever built this knew exactly what they were doing." Cross nodded, already cataloging the details, but something caught his attention: a fragment of paperwork half burned, still clinging to the remains of a filing cabinet. He crouched, lifting it carefully. The words were barely legible, but the HOA letterhead was intact, along with part of a list. A roster of names. He tucked the fragment into an evidence bag. "Start pulling financials, communications, everything the Westbrook HOA touched in the last 5 years," he ordered his team. "If this was their building, they're not victims, they're suspects." By midday, whispers spread among the agents. The HOA's finances were odd. Bloated accounts, untraceable wire transfers, offshore holdings that no neighborhood organization should ever possess. Cross felt the first prick of unease. This wasn't just about community dues or overzealous board members. Later that evening, he sat in the temporary command post set up in a nearby school gymnasium. Maps and photographs covered the walls. Forensics laid out residue samples. Digital analysts highlighted encrypted communications traced to servers overseas. One by one, the pieces painted a disturbing picture. "Sir," an analyst said, approaching with a grim expression, "we found something," cross-referencing the names from the roster with international watch lists. She handed him a file. His eyes narrowed as he read. Several names were aliases linked to a foreign intelligence agency, a hostile power known for deep cover operations. Cross exhaled slowly. The thought was almost absurd, but the evidence was undeniable. The Westbrook Homeowners Association wasn't just meddling in lawn care disputes. It was a front, a cover, operation planted in the heart of suburbia. He turned to his team. We're not just dealing with a bomb, we're dealing with espionage. The HOA isn't local, it's an enemy network, and they've declared war right in the middle of an American neighborhood. The room fell silent. Outside, the quiet suburb carried on, unaware that behind white picket fences and neatly trimmed hedges, a deadly conspiracy had just been uncovered. And for Special Agent Daniel Cross, the hunt had only begun. The following day brought no calm. News outlets scrambled for information, sensationalizing what little they knew. Domestic terror linked to homeowners association, one headline blared. Another claimed, secret society in the suburbs. The public speculated wildly, but Daniel Cross and his team knew the truth. This wasn't domestic. It was international, calculated, and insidious. Cross stood at the center of the FBI command post, the low hum of chatter and clacking keyboards around him. He had requested an immediate background sweep on every board member of the Westbrook HOA, no matter how trivial they seemed. Agents fanned out, knocking on doors, interviewing neighbors, digging through records. What they uncovered was bizarre. On the surface, the HOA board members were ordinary people, an accountant, a retired teacher, a stay-at-home mom, even a local realtor. Their neighbors described them as strict or nosy, but nothing beyond the ordinary complaints about lawn inspections and mailbox regulations. Yet when agents cross-checked identification documents, inconsistencies appeared. Birth certificates that didn't match state records. Passports issued years before those individuals supposedly became U.S. citizens. Employment histories that led to dead ends. Cross leaned over the evidence table, staring at a series of photographs lined up in neat rows. Each face smiled innocently for the camera, but beneath those smiles were carefully crafted lies. These people lived here for years, he muttered. Barbecues, block parties, school fundraisers, and all the while, they were plants. His partner, Special Agent Rebecca Hale, approached with a file. We traced some of their financials, she said, flipping it open. The treasurer of the HOA, a man calling himself Gregory Milton, was funneling dues into shell companies. Those companies linked directly to accounts flagged for laundering money from hostile states. The funds then circled back here, disguised as neighborhood maintenance expenses. Cross raised an eyebrow. So the new playground, the security cameras, even the community landscaping, all paid for by an enemy government? Exactly, Hale confirmed grimly. This wasn't just cover, it was infrastructure. They built a spy hub under the guise of an HOA. The enormity of it sank in. Every meeting, every budget approval, every community improvement had been part of an operation designed to mask something much larger. By evening, Cross ordered a deep sweep of the blast site. Bomb techs combed through rubble, while digital forensics specialists attempted to reconstruct hard drives salvaged from the wreckage. At 9:37 p.m., an agent rushed over, excitement in his eyes. Sir, we cracked part of one drive. There's encrypted correspondence between Milton and an address overseas. Cross scanned the text on the monitor. Most of it was in cipher, but a few decrypted phrases chilled him. Phase 1 complete. Destabilization successful. Awaiting directive for Phase 2. Phase 2? Cross repeated, his tone sharp. There's more coming. Hale's eyes darkened. If the bombing was only Phase 1, what's next? Another attack? A cyber strike? Assassinations? Cross slammed the monitor off. Whatever it is, we can't let it happen. The Bureau authorized a joint task force overnight. Intelligence officers, NSA cryptographers, and local law enforcement coordinated under Cross's command. Still, the pieces weren't moving fast enough. The enemy had already proven their willingness to strike. At 2:00 a.m., a break came. Surveillance footage from a traffic cam near the neighborhood picked up a black SUV leaving the area minutes before the blast. The plates were stolen, but the grainy image of the driver was clear enough. Cross stared at the man's face, hard, angular, with a scar across his cheek. Not on any local records, but Interpol recognized him instantly. Viktor Reznov, the analyst said. Foreign operative, known demolitions expert. He's been connected to at least 5 bombings in Europe. Last confirmed sighting was 2 years ago. Now we know where he's been. Cross straightened, adrenaline coursing through him. Reznov's in the States, which means this wasn't just infiltration. They've brought in their top operatives. The weight of the situation pressed heavily. An HOA acting as a sleeper cell was dangerous enough, but with Reznov in play, the scale of the operation had escalated. The enemy wasn't just probing, they were preparing to strike at America's core. Cross turned to his team, his voice steady but urgent. We're done playing defense. From this point on, we hunt them. Every alias, every shell company, every contact. I want their network exposed and dismantled before they move to Phase 2. No excuses. The room came alive with motion, agents racing to carry out orders. Outside, the night was deceptively quiet, but Cross knew better. Somewhere out there, Viktor Reznov and his handlers were already moving. The clock was ticking, and the next blast could fall anywhere. The next 48 hours blurred into a relentless chase. Special Agent Daniel Cross barely slept, subsisting on sauce, coffee, and adrenaline. The FBI's command post buzzed like a hive, maps and digital feeds filling the room as agents followed threads that twisted into ever darker revelations. The first lead came from the SUV footage. Traffic cameras traced Reznov's vehicle across county lines, finally losing him near an abandoned industrial park 30 miles outside the city. Cross dispatched a tactical surveillance team. They returned with grainy drone images of movement inside one of the warehouses, shadows, equipment crates, and the unmistakable gleam of weapon components under artificial light. It's a staging ground, Hale said, analyzing the images. They're building something in there. Cross studied the screen. Too organized to be just a hideout. They wouldn't risk exposure unless it was critical. He tapped the warehouse outline. Reznov is preparing Phase 2 here. We need eyes inside. The Bureau's legal department hesitated. Raiding a suspected foreign cell without airtight intel could spark political chaos if mishandled. Cross knew it, but waiting wasn't an option. They already detonated one bomb, he told the brass during a tense briefing. If we sit on our hands, the next one could hit downtown, maybe worse. Authorize the op. By nightfall, Cross led a 6-man team in tactical gear through the industrial wasteland. The warehouse loomed in the moonlight, its corrugated metal walls scarred with rust, its windows dark. They moved silently, weapons raised, communication tight over earpieces. Every crunch of gravel underfoot echoed like thunder. Inside, the warehouse was a cavern of shadows. Wooden crates stacked high, wires trailing across the concrete floor. The faint hum of generators and the smell of oil filled the air. Then Cross saw it, half-assembled cylindrical devices lined up on tables, not crude pipe bombs, military-grade explosives modified for maximum destruction. Hale whispered, "My God, they're making more." Before he could signal the team to secure evidence, a sound cut through the silence, a faint metallic click. Cross froze. From the shadows, a figure emerged, scarred cheek glinting under the fluorescent light. Viktor Reznov. "Americans," Reznov said in accented English, his voice low and cold, always so predictable. In one swift motion, Reznov raised a detonator. Cross dove forward, shouting, "Down!" The explosion ripped through the far end of the warehouse, throwing fire and shrapnel across the room. The shockwave knocked Cross against a crate, his ears ringing. Flames erupted, smoke pouring upward. "Go, go, go!" Cross barked, pulling Hale to her feet. His team scrambled, returning fire as Reznov slipped into the chaos. Bullets cracked against steel beams, sparks flying. Reznov vanished through a side door, disappearing into the night. They barely escaped before the structure collapsed, fire swallowing the evidence inside. Outside, coughing and bloodied, Cross watched the warehouse burn. Another blow to their investigation, and Reznov had escaped again. But not everything was lost. Amid the rubble, Hale clutched a scorched folder she'd grabbed in the chaos. Inside were fragments of documents, charred at the edges, but still legible. One sheet bore a heading in Cyrillic script, with a seal belonging to the Foreign Intelligence Directorate. Another contained coded strings, coordinates, dates, and references to Operation Emberfall. Cross's pulse quickened. Emberfall, a name, a plan. Finally, something concrete. At the command post, analysts scrambled to decode the fragments. The coordinates pointed to multiple cities across the country. each one marked with potential sabotage targets. But one city, in bold red, appeared repeatedly: Washington, D.C. "They're planning something bigger," Hale whispered. "The bomb here was just a test run." Cross stared at the map, and the weight of realization pressing hard. Reznov isn't finished. Emberfall is their endgame, and if DC is the target— He didn't need to finish the sentence. Everyone in the room knew what it meant. The attack in Westbrook wasn't just terrorism. It was the opening salvo of a campaign meant to destabilize the nation. For the first time, Cross felt a chill, not just of fear, but of inevitability. Reznov had slipped their grasp, and the clock was already ticking. If they didn't stop Emberfall, the next explosion would shake the capital itself. The charred fragments of the folder sat in protective sleeves on the evidence table. Analysts hovered over them, their screens glowing with lines of decryption software. The hum of the command post never ceased. Phones ringing, keyboards clattering, the low murmur of strategists debating. But all of it faded into a dull buzz for Daniel Cross. His eyes were locked on one phrase that had survived the fire: Operation Emberfall. The word carried a weight that pulled at his gut. It wasn't just a mission name, it was a declaration. Cross had seen operations like this before in classified dossiers and whispered briefings. An ember suggested fire, destruction, a spark meant to ignite something larger, and fall, the collapse of a system. Together, the meaning was clear. This was no local terror plot. It was a campaign to bring America to its knees. "Sir," one of the analysts called, pulling Cross from his thoughts. "We've decrypted part of the code. Looks like Emberfall is structured in phases. Phase 1 was Westbrook. Phase 2 involves multiple targets, but the final entry lists Phase 3, DC confirmed." Cross's jaw tightened. The capital wasn't just a city, it was the nation's heart. An attack there could cripple infrastructure, destabilize government, and shatter public trust. It was the kind of strike that enemy states dread of pulling off. Rebecca Hale stepped up beside him, her brow furrowed as she scanned the data. "If they've already deployed Reznov here, it means Phase 2 is in motion. We might not have much time before Phase 3. Then we cut them off at the knees before they get there," Cross said firmly. The next morning, the Bureau convened a high-level interagency briefing. Representatives from Homeland Security, the CIA, and even the Pentagon gathered around a long table, their faces grim. Cross stood at the front, presenting the evidence. The projection screen showed photos of the blast site, surveillance stills of Reznov, and decrypted fragments of Emberfall. "Our enemy has been hiding in plain sight," Cross said, his voice carrying across the room. The Westbrook Homeowners Association wasn't a quirky neighborhood council. It was a sleeper cell. They infiltrated our communities, built infrastructure, and staged an attack to test our response times. Reznov's presence confirms this is a state-sponsored operation. A murmur spread through the room. One CIA officer leaned forward, frowning. "You're saying an entire HOA was a front for foreign intelligence? That's unprecedented." "Unprecedented doesn't mean impossible," Cross shot back. "They used the perfect cover. No one questions nosy neighbors or mandatory dues. It gave them money, authority, and access to every resident. They weaponized bureaucracy." The room fell silent. The reality was sinking in. A Pentagon liaison finally spoke. "What's the next move?" Cross switched slides to display the Emberfall coordinates. "We've identified several potential Phase 2 targets: bridges, transit hubs, and a regional power station. If we can intercept Reznov or his network before these attacks, we stop Emberfall from reaching Phase 3. Approval came reluctantly. Agencies weren't eager to commit resources without absolute certainty, but the specter of another bombing hung over them like a storm cloud. By the meeting's end, a multi-agency task force was greenlit, with Cross at the helm. That night, as the command post quieted, Hale approached Cross. "Do you think they'll listen? Really listen? Or are we on our own?" Cross leaned against the table, exhaustion etched into his features. "They'll listen if we bring results. Until then, we act like we're alone." Hale sighed, then glanced at the evidence wall where Reznov's scarred face glared from a surveillance still. "He won't stop. You know that." "No." Cross said quietly. But neither will we. The following morning, fresh intel arrived. A long-range camera had captured Reznov entering a storage facility under a false name. Satellite heat signatures confirmed heavy activity inside, not explosives this time, but weapons crates, communications gear, and enough supplies to suggest a larger team. Cross stared at the photos, his gut telling him what the intel couldn't yet prove. Reznov wasn't working alone. The HOA was only the surface. Emberfall was bigger, deeper, and far more dangerous than they imagined. And if they didn't strike fast, the next explosion wouldn't be confined to a suburban community. It would echo across the nation. The storage facility sat on the outskirts of a quiet industrial district, a long row of corrugated units with peeling paint and chain-link fences. To the untrained eye, it was nothing more than a forgotten corner of the city, where old businesses stored broken equipment and bankrupt tenants abandoned dusty records. But Cross knew better. Satellite thermal imaging had shown heat patterns too consistent for random storage, and the intel linked Reznov to a lease under a false identity. This was no accident. This was a staging ground. The Bureau had wrestled over jurisdiction all morning. CIA analysts demanded more surveillance before taking action. Homeland Security wanted confirmation of foreign involvement. But Cross was done with red tape. Reznov was a bomber, not a bureaucrat. If they waited for committees, innocent lives would be lost. At 0200 hours, Cross assembled his team. Hale was at his side, rifle slung across her chest. Behind them, 4 tactical agents loaded gear into unmarked SUVs. The air was heavy with anticipation, the kind that made every movement deliberate, every breath controlled. Rules are simple, Cross briefed, pointing to a map under the dim light of the vehicle's dome. We breach, sweep, and secure evidence. Reznov is high value. If he's here, we take him alive. But if he resists, we end him. Hale finished coldly. The team rolled silently into the district, engines low, headlights cut. The facility loomed ahead, rows of units stretching into the dark. They parked 2 blocks away, advancing on foot. Night vision goggles washed the scene in ghostly green. Cross signaled. Bolt cutters snapped through the gate's lock. They slipped inside. The silence was suffocating. Only the distant bark of a stray dog broke the night. Unit 47 was their target. Its rusted padlock looked ordinary, but Cross noticed faint scratches near the keyhole, signs of recent use. He crouched, inspecting the frame. A thin wire, barely visible, ran from the latch into the seam of the door. "Trap," he whispered. Hale followed the wire with her eyes. "Booby trap. Open it, and the whole unit goes up." Cross swore under his breath. Reznov had anticipated them. He pulled a multi-tool from his belt, carefully clipping the wire near its anchor point. The team held their breath. Nothing detonated. "Clear," he said, standing. 2 agents pried the lock and pulled the door open. Inside, the unit was packed with crates, military-grade rifles, ammunition belts, radio equipment, and blueprints. The stench of oil and metal filled the air. But what froze Cross in place was the centerpiece, a half-assembled bomb, larger than anything they'd yet seen, its wiring meticulous, its casing reinforced. Hale's voice was low, steady. "That's not for testing. That's for maximum yield." Cross examined the wiring. It was sophisticated, layered with redundancies. This wasn't a bomb meant to intimidate. It was meant to cripple. "Bag everything," Cross ordered. "Every scrap of intel leaves with us." As the team set to work, Cross noticed a single folder lying atop a crate. He opened it, scanning quickly. Photographs of government buildings, annotated in Cyrillic. Handwritten notes in the margins. And at the bottom, a sealed envelope stamped with the same Intelligence Directorate crest they had seen before. Inside was a single page, stark and simple. Phase 2, Activation, 3 targets. Bridge, power grid, metro system. Execute within 72 hours. Cross's blood ran cold. 72 hours. The clock was already ticking. Suddenly, the radio on one agent's vest crackled with static. A voice broke through, distorted but clear enough to chill them all. "You think you're hunting us, Agent Cross," the voice sneered in accented English. "But we are always watching you." The team froze, eyes darting around the shadows outside the unit. Hale raised her weapon, scanning the darkness. Cross gritted his teeth, slamming the radio off. Reznov, he muttered. The bastard wasn't just building bombs, he was taunting them, proving he knew their every move. Cross turned to his team, urgency burning in his eyes. We've got less than 3 days to stop 3 coordinated strikes. We take this intel back, and we don't sleep until Emberfall is dead. The unit was sealed, evidence secured. But I drove away into the night, Cross couldn't shake the feeling of being followed. Somewhere out there, Reznov was watching, waiting, always one step ahead, and time was running out. The command post was chaos. Maps of the city plastered every wall, red pins marking critical infrastructure. Agents hunched over laptops, tracing schematics of power substations, bridge load capacities, and metro tunnel blueprints. The 72-hour deadline loomed like a ticking bomb in everyone's mind. Cross stood at the center, his voice cutting through the din. We've got 3 targets: a bridge, the power grid, and the metro. Reznov didn't specify which bridge, which grid, or which metro line. He wants us drowning in options. Hale paced, a binder tucked under her arm. The city has 7 major bridges. Knock out the right one during rush hour, and you cripple transportation for weeks. As for the power grid, there are 3 main substations that feed the metro area. Hit even one, and the blackout ripples across hospitals, airports, everything. And the metro system? Cross added grimly. That's the nightmare scenario. A bomb underground would trap thousands, collapse tunnels, and cause mass panic. The team fell silent, the weight of the possibilities pressing on them. Cross slammed his fist lightly on the table. We don't have the luxury of guessing. We find Reznov before he deploys. Period. The analysts dug deeper. One, a wiry young man with glasses, piped up. Sir, I ran cross-references between the photos in the folder and city blueprints. Look at this. He projected 2 grainy photographs onto the wall, both of bridges. One was the Jefferson Suspension Bridge, spanning the river into the financial district. The other, the North Line Overpass, a heavily trafficked commuter route. They were both circled in the files. Reznov doesn't need to hit every target. Just one would be catastrophic. Another analyst chimed in. We found encrypted chatter on the recovered radios. Phrases like lights out and river fall. That suggests the power grid and the suspension ridge. 2 out of 3, Hale said. And if we're lucky, that means the metro's a decoy. Cross shook his head. Reznov doesn't do decoys. He'll hit all 3 if he can. We have to assume the worst. The FBI coordinated with local police, SWAT, and transit authorities. Security was tightened at every potential target. Patrols swept bridges around the clock. Power stations were placed under guard. Metro security doubled. Plainclothes agents scattered across platforms. But Reznov was no amateur. He had eluded Interpol for years, slipping through borders like smoke. For every measure they put in place, he would find a counter. That night, Cross stared at the map wall long after the others had gone. The city looked fragile, like glass, waiting for a hammer. He felt the weight of lives hanging in the balance. Hale approached quietly, a mug of coffee in her hands. You haven't slept, she said softly. Neither have you, Cross replied. She handed him the coffee anyway. For a moment, silence stretched between them. Then Hale asked, Do you ever think he's playing with us, leaving breadcrumbs just to see how we dance? Cross took a long sip, eyes fixed on Reznov's photo pinned above the map. The scarred face seemed to smirk even in stillness. He's not playing. He's rehearsing. Every move is calculated. If we're dancing, it's because he's conducting. A sudden buzz from the operations desk broke the moment. An agent waved them over. Sir, we've got movement. On screen, live drone footage showed a convoy of 2 vans pulling into an abandoned rail yard on the city's east side. Heat signatures indicated multiple individuals unloading crates. Among them, a tall man with a distinctive gait, moving with the confidence of someone in control. Reznov. Cross's heart kicked. Gear up, we move now. Hale snapped her rifle into place. About time we take the conductor off. The stage. The team scrambled, vehicles roaring to life as they prepared to intercept. The rail yard loomed on the screen, its shadows deep, its silence deceptive. Somewhere in that darkness, Phase 2 of Emberfall was being assembled. And unless Cross stopped it tonight, the city would wake to fire and chaos. They rolled in under a moonless sky, engines whispering through the industrial district like predators. Flashbangs, breaching tools, and the low thump of tactical radios were the only sounds cutting the heavy air. Cross felt the familiar hum in his bones, a hard, cold focus that narrowed everything to the task at hand. The rail yard was a graveyard of rusted boxcars and skeletal cranes, a maze of shadows where a single misstep could mean the difference between success and catastrophe. Two vans sat idling by a cluster of freight containers, their taillights like dull eyes. Dark figures moved between stacks of pallets. Heat signatures flickered on the goggles. At least 8 operatives, maybe more. One silhouette stood taller than the others, shoulders proud even in the grainy image. Reznov. Cross signaled the team. They flowed into position, 2 teams on either flank, a third ready to cut off any escape down the spur line. Hale's voice was steady in his ear. Breach in 30. They hit the yard like a thunderclap. Doors exploded inward, the world filling with blinding light and the thunderous crack of controlled detonations. Men shouted, boots slammed metal catwalks, and for a breathless second, everything was pure, kinetic motion. Cross moved with the lead element, every sense tuned. He could smell the diesel, the dust, and the metallic tang of adrenaline. Shots rang out, quick, precise, and some of the operatives returned fire. Cross pushed toward the central container where the heat signatures were densest. Inside, crates lay open, weapons, radios, wiring, and skeletal shells of devices not yet completed. Men scurried to assemble components. A sense of grim efficiency surrounded them. Reznov was there, orchestrating like a conductor. He barked orders in clipped Russian, hands slicing the air. Cross saw his chance and lunged forward, rifle up. Hale covered his flank, taking 2 steps in and sweeping a line with her weapon. Freeze! Cross barked, the command a grenade that exploded in the container. For a second, everyone froze. Then, like a live wire snapping, chaos resumed. One operative dove for a side door. Cross lunged, tackling him to the ground. The man snarled and the two scuffled amid coil of wire and packing foam. Across the yard, a younger operative, maybe a courier, maybe something more, dashed for the rails clutching a satchel. An agent moved to intercept and was met with a sharp crack. A silenced rifle. The man went down. Cross saw Reznov pivot, eyes cold and calculating, and he knew the man had already planned 3 escape routes. They secured 3 of the operatives, rough hands and handcuffs, curses spat in tongues Cross didn't understand. They found passports with multiple aliases, bank transfer records, and a small encrypted drive stamped with the same directorate seal. It was a trove of proof, supply chains, handler names, and timetables. Cross felt the relief surge through him like warm blood. At least some pieces were now in their hands. But Reznov was gone. Cross chased a shadow across the yard, sprinting for a chain-link fence where the tall operative had slipped through an access gap. The gap led to the rail embankment where a boxcar was idling. Doors open, the perfect getaway. Cross slammed his shoulder into the steel, grappling for purchase, but the tide had already turned. Reznov had melted into the night, a ghost swallowed by the city's veins. They radioed for aerial sweep and blocking maneuvers, called in canine units and nearby highway checkpoints. Dozens of officers fanned out, searching shipping manifests and questioning drivers. But Reznov had long practice in vanishing. He had safe houses and false identities tucked into bureaucratic shadows. His absence nagged at Cross, a gap they couldn't afford. Back at the command post, they cracked the encrypted drive. It took time, hours bending into a long, caffeine-stoked fuse, but the reward was worth the burn. The drive contained schematics and a timeline more specific than they'd yet seen, a primary plan for a metro station beneath the financial district, timed to coincide with a rush-hour power outage and a simultaneous demolition of a suspension bridge during sunset traffic. The documents included vendor invoices, shipment logs, and the names of local contractors who'd been unwittingly used as cover. One file listed a courier route with a timestamp only 40 hours away. Cross stared at the screen until the letters blurred. Reznov had nearly completed the orchestra. Emberfall's cadence was tightening to its finale. The rail yard raid had been a partial victory. Supplies seized, operatives detained, and a map of the enemy's intent revealed. But the conductor remained free to strike. Hale planted a hand on his shoulder, voice low and hard. "We've got targets, Dan. We've got people. We just need to cut Reznov's arms off. He nodded, the exhaustion in his bones replaced by the kind of anger that burns away uncertainty. Then that's what we do. We break their supply chains, we lock down the contractors, and we shut down every possible window they have. Reznov runs on logistics. We choke them. Emberfall dies tonight. Outside, the city pulsed on, unaware of how close it had come. Inside the command post, the hunt sharpened into something more than just its reaction. It became a plan, precise and cold. And somewhere beyond their reach, Reznov plotted his next move, patient and deadly as a spider. They moved like a shadow strike team, the task force splitting into focused units to suffocate Reznov's logistics. Cross drew up the lists: contractors whose invoices matched crate shipments, courier companies with suspicious manifest entries, and the back-end shell corporations that had laundered HOA money into operational funds. He allotted teams for subpoenas, raids, and surveillance, tight windows where timing would be everything. Local law enforcement hit the contractors first. Plainclothes agents posed as clients, inspectors, even delivery drivers. They visited construction offices, probed small landscaping firms, and questioned night shift workers who might have handled crates without knowing their contents. Most of those contractors reacted with confusion and indignation. Who would suspect a hole-digging crew of facilitating terrorism? But under aggressive questioning, a few broke. One foreman admitted he'd hauled municipal supplies paid for by an HOA account that generously overpaid and requested discretion. He produced invoices, signatures, and one photograph of a crate that matched images from the rail yard. Every paper trail they unearthed was a thread pulling them closer to Reznov's network. Cross kept thinking of the families in Westbrook, of the HOA meetings where neighbors argued about paint colors, of how a mundane civic organization could be refashioned into a conduit for violence. The thought made his jaw clench. Hatred for the perpetrators sharpened into a practical instrument. They would not only stop Emberfall, they would tear down the mechanisms that had let it flourish. Meanwhile, the cyber unit focused on the shell companies. Night turned into day as analysts crawled through bank ledgers and transfer records, isolating accounts with repetitive microtransactions that masked the larger flow. Offshore banks, straw donors, and phony invoices told a story of deliberate obfuscation. Cross watched the screens as balances moved like tectonic plates, small, stealthy transfers becoming a mountain of funding that had kept Reznov's operation fed. He authorized asset freezes and coordinated with international partners to choke those accounts. But Reznov adapted. He'd anticipated a clampdown on financial arteries and shifted to cash couriers, men who rode interstates and used legitimate freight channels to move unmarked pallets. The courier route on the Seas Drive was still active, and the timestamp listed a pickup that would happen in under 20 hours at a rural freight terminal. If Cross could intercept that single pallet, they might stop the immediate deployment of devices intended for the metro. They set an ambush. A team lay in wait beneath a rain-slick sky at the freight terminal, surveillance flanking every exit. Hours crawled while radios hummed with static and agents smoked in the shelter of their cars. At 03:14, a refrigerated semi pulled into the lot, the driver glancing around with practiced nonchalance. Two men in the back unloaded a single crate onto a pallet and pushed it toward a waiting box truck. Cross's team moved like a snap. Officers swarmed, shouts piercing the cold air, and the men went for a sidearm. Gunshots cracked. One courier went down, the other dropped his weapon and raised his hands. The crate was unmarked, heavy, and when they pried it open, the room filled with a metallic clinical smell. Components, sensors, timing circuits, and a set of detonators. Evidence cataloged, chain of custody established. For one SMIM, all moment, the world seemed to breathe. But victory came tempered. Inside the crate, hidden in a false compartment, was a slim envelope. Inside that envelope, a single line: "You will stop one, but the song continues." Handwritten, in a language Cross couldn't place at first. For all their seizures, Reznov's reach remained a hydra. Cut one head and another would spring forth. At the same time, cross-referencing the driver's phones produced an unexpected lead. One device pinged near Westbrook 2 months prior, long before the blast, near the home of an HOA board member named Alice McKenna. McKenna, a retired school librarian and community stalwart, had been a face of the HOA for the last decade, presiding over potlucks and neighborhood watch schedules. She sat in her small kitchen now when agents knocked, tea gone cold in her cup, her hands shaking as they read her the warrant. Mrs. McKenna, we need to ask about your involvement with the HOA's financial disbursements, Cross said gently, though his tone was edged steel. She blinked slowly, eyes wet with confusion. We did community work. Garden beds, benches. Her voice was small. I put up posters. I didn't know. At first she seemed sincere. The neighbors' testimonies painted her as genuine, but the ping on her devices and her name on a faded invoice forced them to look closer. Cross watched her as detectives combed through her files. In a box under the sink, they found a ledger, handwriting neat and familiar, HOA minutes, receipts, but also coded entries and a set of numbers that matched routing details on the seized drive. McKenna's protestations crumbled. Tears came, not from guilt, but from a dawning horror. I never knew what it was for, she whispered. They told us it was for community outreach, for repairs. I signed things. I wanted neighbors to feel safe. Her hands wrung a dish towel. If I'd known. McKenna began to talk in stuttering bursts, revealing meetings where foreign operatives had hovered in the background, offering to sponsor festivals and donate to new streetlights. She described a man who'd taken her aside once and asked her to deposit a check into a special account as a favor to the neighborhood. She remembered a name, an innocuous one, used in HOA minutes that now glinted under scrutiny like a needle. Her cooperation cracked a small gap in the armor. With her statements and the courier seizure, Cross mapped an operational lattice. Who handled logistics? Who provided cover stories? Who paid whom? It wasn't every answer, but it was progress. Emberfall had fissures they could exploit. As dawn bled into the city, Cross felt both weariness and resolve. Each lead brought them closer, and yet Reznov remained tantalizingly mobile. The campaign continued to hum in the background like a distant engine. They had slowed the rhythm, but the music played on. It was a reminder. In a war waged from the shadows, victories were often small and hard-won, and the enemy's final note might yet be the loudest. The city was stirring awake when Cross stood by the command center window, watching the sunrise split the skyline. The rail yard raid, the courier bust, and Alice McKenna's broken testimony had given them pieces of Emberfall. Yet Reznov remained free, the conductor still unseen in the dark. Cross knew well that intelligence work was rarely about grand finales. It was about pressure, grinding persistence, and denying the enemy the chance to breathe. The encrypted drive sat on the table before him, its cracked files still glowing on the screen. They'd mapped shipment routes, frozen accounts, and pulled Reznov's network into the light. Metro security teams were already in place, contractors vetted and cleared, transit hubs shielded by silent patrols. The bridge demolite. Iron plan had been dismantled before scaffolding even went up. Reznov's carefully timed orchestra had been reduced to discordant fragments. Hale walked in, her face drawn from the long nights. She placed a steaming cup of coffee beside him. Couriers singing. He gave up 2 safe houses. Locals hit them both before dawn, empty. But the gear was still inside. We've got more detonators off the street. Cross nodded, absorbing it. Reznov's losing grip. He wanted Emberfall to play like a symphony. Now it's just static. Hale leaned on the table. We cut his supply lines, his funding's crippled, and thanks to McKenna's testimony, the HOA's shell has collapsed. Neighbors are furious. They'll never be used like this again. For a moment, silence hung between them. Cross stared at the files, then out at the waking city. He thought of the families in Westbrook, of the ordinary people who had trusted a community board only to be betrayed. He thought of the operatives who would never stand trial, and of Reznov, somewhere out there, planning his next move. We didn't get him, Hale said softly, reading his mind. Cross's jaw tightened. No, but we stopped this. That's enough for now. It wasn't satisfaction, but it was truth. Operations like these never ended with neat bows. They ended with fractures, victories measured in lives spared rather than villains captured. Reznov would resurface. Men like him always did, and when he did, the Bureau would be waiting. Cross closed the file, slid the drive into evidence, and let out a long breath. Get some rest, Hale. We'll need fresh eyes when he makes his next mistake. She managed a tired smile. You really think he'll slip? They always do, Cross replied, turning back to the window. And when he does, we'll be there. The city stretched beneath him, imperfect, scarred, but alive. The HOA was finished, its mask of neighbor, Hood's civility ripped away. The enemy country's grip had loosened, its operation dismantled. For now, the bombings were over. For now, the people could breathe. And for Dan Cross, that was victory enough.